Thanks, guys. Appreciate you allowing me to be with you guys from the comfort of my own home. Don't let it fool you. This spot looks like I'm in like the Westin Hotel. The rest of the room is like I just threw everything in every direction. All right. So, but it is really kind of new to me. I'd never really done or like kind of shared a message or whatever. God has placed on my heart through a Zoom call. So bear with me if you hear anything like it's like, I don't know, feedback or anything, throw a hand up. I'll be more than happy to fix or adjust any way that I can. But again, it's so amazing that you guys are all working so intentionally to be a part of what TCNJ is doing, even kind of making sure that you're being able to kind of get together from a virtual sense. You've heard this so often that we're living in unprecedented times where people are so confused as to, hey, how do we respond to what's happening in the world today? And I think that you guys are doing the very thing that you need to do in a moment of crisis, and that's fellowshipping and that's communing with one another. So I think that's pretty incredible. I used to always say that I wish I had this type of a networking community when I was in college. I wasn't like intentional enough to go out and look for that. Hearing Lewis's testimony was something that touched my heart. Even Jane and Rachel were saying like that was a powerful word. God bless you, bro. Thanks so much for kind of being so vulnerable and sharing kind of that experience and journey that God kind of put you through, and it's just going to continue skyrocketing from here. And I had a very similar situation, but today I want to touch base on this one of my favorite books in the Bible, which is James. I say that about almost every book, but James is very peculiar because of who he is and where he draws his inspiration from. It's going to be difficult for me to kind of figure out what style I want to kind of preach with, because it's, I like seeing like all the faces all in one room and kind of all spread out, but I can only see 4 people at a time right now because I'm on my phone, but I'm gonna keep swiping as I go. But James is a really, really special book, and especially chapter 3 is something that we are going to zone in on a little bit more than the rest of the book in essence. But James was the half-brother of Jesus. I can't think of any greater pressure than being related to Jesus. Because if you think about it, I've got like this middle child syndrome, right? I'm the middle child. I got an older brother. Someone loves him. I got a younger sister. Someone loves her. Like, it's like, then you got that middle child syndrome where you're just like, you know what I mean? You feel like neglected and all that. It's not really true. Your parents say they love you all equally, but you know that there's a little bit of a difference. And I'm even thinking in terms of Jesus. Can you imagine being the half brother of Jesus and your mom coming up to you saying, well, why can't you be like Jesus? You know what I mean? And that's the exact same thing that he went to. James actually didn't believe that Jesus was who he said he was until after his resurrection. Like, James was like, yeah, okay, Jesus, I appreciate your ministry, but I was with you when you were a baby. I was with you when you were in diapers. I was with you when you cried. I was with you all these times. There's no way that you are the Son of God because I knew who your daddy was. Right? So it's kind of like this kind of, he failed to believe it. But it was after the resurrection where he completely, along with some other brothers, was someone that completely shifted his focus and dedication and allegiance to Jesus, his brother, as his God. And we see that as a result of that, James ended up becoming the leader of the church in Jerusalem. He became someone that was filled with this concept and understanding of the practical application of what we're going to talk about, and that's wisdom. If you look at what truly inspires James, the book of James only has 5 chapters, right? Yeah, 5 chapters. And this entire book, these 5 chapters, are completely consumed with 2 specific types of teachings. It's the teachings of Jesus, him growing up with him. And then secondly, it's the teachings of the book of Proverbs, which is prophetic oracles that come from God to Solomon, who ended up penning that down on paper. Now, Proverbs is a book that's so completely focused on wisdom. How do we operate in wisdom? And that's something that I cannot stress enough from this moment onwards, if not already, through the rest of your life. How you understand and live out wisdom will dictate what the rest of your spiritual and even just life in general looks like. Because it's when it's in the operation of true wisdom that not only do you begin to establish yourself as someone that God can depend on this earth, but in the process, you're actually also creating for yourself and storing up for yourself treasures in eternity that are going to be so evident when we are able to see Jesus on the other shore. So today, in essence, we're going to be looking at James chapter 3, which looks like it's talking about taming of the tongue, which it is. You know, if you've heard of it, like the tongue is like a rudder. You've heard of the concept of taming the tongue, and that is what James chapter 3 is talking about. But even more deeper than that, this is talking about two specific types of people. It's talking about people, number one, that operate in a human or unspiritual or even demonic wisdom. And then it's talking about a group of people that operate in a godly wisdom. Those are the only two types of people that exist in the world. And all of us are people that are influenced and have acted in earthly wisdom within this lifetime. All of us. You might have done it today. I know I have. It's our nature to respond to life with an earthly wisdom. But God is reminding us through this portion of scripture that when you are able to intentionally live in a godly, pure wisdom, you will see my hand move in incredible ways. And that is actually, I would argue, the key to success. Because when you're tapping into godly wisdom in its fullness of his glory, you're a catapult of just of a vessel that God just uses to do some crazy, incredible, powerful things in your school, in your workplace, in your families. It's insane how much trust God is able to put on you because you are able to operate in the one thing that is incredibly difficult to operate in, and that's godly wisdom. So we're going to dig into a couple portion of scriptures. We're going to be messing around James chapter 3 a lot, but I want to hop back and forth into a couple different portions of scriptures. But the first thing that we're going to look at is we're going to look at James chapter 3. If I'm not mistaken, that's going to be James chapter 3, verses 3 to 5. And I'm just going to read that to you guys. If we put bits into the mouths of horses so that they obey us, we guide their whole bodies as well. Look at the ships also. They are so large, they're driven by strong winds. They're guided by a very small rudder wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also, the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things. Basically, what James is trying to say here is that one of the biggest things that stands in opposition to godly wisdom is that thing in our mouths. It's our tongue. Because our tongue has so much power. It has so much ability to produce death and life. And so James, more than anything, he's saying, listen, you've got to be so careful with how you're operating with this instrument on your body, and that's your tongue. And if we look at Matthew chapter 12, verse 34, it's Jesus that says, you brood of vipers, how can you speak good when you are evil? For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Basically, what Jesus is saying here is that what your heart really looks like, what your heart actually has the intention of thinking or saying or doing, that's what comes out of your mouth. So if we as people are saying things that are bringing kind of like a disrespect or a hurt to others, it's actually something that's within our heart that is leading that, because the overflow of our heart comes out of our mouth. And so Jesus is here saying, listen, out of the abundance of your heart comes what comes out of the mouth. And so we have to be more intentional than ever before in being careful as far as what we're feeding our heart, because what we feed our heart is ultimately what comes out of our mouth towards the people that are around us. When you're thinking in terms of quarantine, we're spending a lot of time around people that we normally did not spend that much time around. You know what I mean? And that's a crazy thing, because we could be spending so much time around our family members or really, really close friends or whoever it might be, not out of like desire, but out of necessity. And it's very easy for things to slip out of our mouths that might offend other people. And that whole concept of sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. That's not true, okay? Because words, and we all know it, every single person here has a story that can correlate to a time when a word was spoken over them that rang in their ears and even tried to direct the pathway of their life. So no one can ever say that words have no meanings and words can't hurt you. Words have the ability to break you if you truly allow it to. At the same time, your words can break other people, even if it's not your intention to do so. So operating and controlling the tongue is one of the most difficult things that James is trying to say. He's actually saying in this portion of scripture, I didn't get this reference up, but in verse chapter 6, James says, the tongue is a fire and a world of unrighteousness. Now, here's the thing. We have this tongue. And there's only one thing that is described as unrighteousness. Because the reason why James says this is because in our fallen nature, no matter how much we try out of our own flesh or out of our own ability, we will never be able to use this tongue for something that's able to glorify God. But the power of God and the reliance on him is what gives us the capacity to be able to do that. So the tongue can never be utilized for something good out of our own flesh. It's not possible. It needs to be completely submitted to the will of God. And when we submit our words, our thoughts, and the things that we intend to say to others to the intentional will of God, that's when we see that God is able to use it. James goes on to say that the tongue is set amongst our members, sustaining the whole body and setting on fire the entire course of life, and set on fire by hell. James is only saying bad things about this thing that we have, this tongue. He's only saying like really, really sad things. He even says that it's set on fire by hell. It's set on fire by hell. What James is saying in the actual Greek, it's Gehenna. Gehenna was this portion or this region. He's basically saying that the thing that fuels your tongue is Gehenna. Or in other words, it was a region right outside of Israel where actually people who would worship the pagan gods would sacrifice their children by putting it on like this burning altar. There was a god named Moloch. And Moloch kind of like was like I might have told you guys this, but Moloch was like this kind of like this statue that had its arms out. And on its arms, it kind of had like this bronze plate. And fire would be lit underneath it. And it was a fertility god that people would place their babies on. And they would, it's kind of redundant, but they would kill their babies so that they would have more babies. But that's essentially what they were doing. And then when the babies would die, they would throw the babies into this heap, like this kind of pile. And smoke can be seen from way far out of the city of babies that are just being lit up on fire into the skies. I know that's so gruesome, but the picture that I want to paint is that James is thinking of that picture. Think of like you're a traveler that's walking into Israel, and as you're walking in that direction, you see the smoke coming and this rotten smell and this putrid imagery that's kind of in that area of Gehenna. James is literally saying that our tongue has the ability to create that type of a destruction and that type of a kind of injustice. And so he's saying that the only way that we can combat that is by moving and operating in godly wisdom. And so wisdom is where I want to kind of spend the next or the final few moments that I have before me in kind of really talking to you about. Because he goes on to say that no human being can truly tame the tongue. There's nothing that you and I can do in an earthly sense, in our own merit, in our own strength, to add value to the tongue that we have. Everything that we say needs to be filtered within the presence of God. So when we're saying, okay, fix your tongue, or how do you kind of control the words that are coming out of your mouth? Well, James is literally saying in chapter 3, verses 13, he who is wise and understanding amongst you, who is wise and understanding among you, by his good conduct, let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom. He's literally saying that you need to practice intentionality in order to be someone that operates in godly wisdom. The other place where you see wisdom talked about a lot, or the main verse that talks about it throughout all of Scripture, is Proverbs chapter 9, verse 10. Proverbs chapter 9, verse 10 basically says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. See, that is something that always confused me growing up. I never really understood, what does it mean to fear God, and how does that give us wisdom? Now, the reason why I want to mention this is because the only way, as James is saying, the only way we can be people that utilize our tongue in a godly way is if we have wisdom from God. Now, Proverbs chapter 9, verse 10 specifically tells us how that wisdom is gained. And for the next few moments, I'm going to talk about what wisdom is and how we obtain it. So Proverbs chapter 9, verse 10 says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Essentially, God is saying that when you fear me, you are able to access this untapped revelation that allows you to see the hearts of other people, allows you to see the true intention of other people, and allows you to figure out how do you respond to things that come in your direction. And when you're navigating a conversation, how do you respond so that no one gets offended and God is getting the glory? And so that is what it is. When you fear God, you get that type of a wisdom. The question is, well, what do you mean by fearing God? Like, are you supposed to be scared of him or something like that? First, I'll talk about what the fear of the Lord is not. The fear of God, or fear in this sense, is not any type of natural fear, okay? A natural fear is like if you're falling. You know, like if you are, I shared the story one time before, but one time I was on a Ferris wheel. And I was on a Ferris wheel with one of my buddies, and the guardrail wasn't locked. And so when the wheel got to the top of when our cart got to the top of the wheel, I just started messing with the guy, and I started lifting up the bar. And then this guy started freaking out, like he actually got scared. Now it was kind of like just shimmying it just a little bit, but I didn't realize it was actually unlocked. And we come up and we lift it up and we both start screaming. And so that's a natural fear, right? The fear of heights. When somebody comes up behind you and says, boo, that's like a natural fear. And the fear of God is not having any type of a natural human fear of him. And so that's one thing that needs to be very clear. So the fear of God is not a natural fear. It's not like that fear that you get when you're falling, when someone says boo or something like that. It's not like that. Secondly, the fear of God is not a demonic fear. Those are very real things, whether we have heard about it or seen it or believe it or not. There is such thing as a demonic fear. Anyone who knows my testimony, and I wish I would be able to share this in person, but in essence, when I was in college for years, I was dealing with something that I guess I called sleep paralysis, where it would be the middle of the night at 3 a.m. or something like that, and I would just be completely just struck with just this paralysis, where I'd be seeing figures around me to completely control my entire life. And I used to do this thing where, like, I didn't go to sleep at night. I would go to the library and I'd just stay in the library until like 5 a.m. So I'd go there from like 10. I'd beg my friends, yo, like, let's just study like till like 3 a.m. Like, how fun would that be? You know what I mean? And they were like, I don't get what you're talking about. But I was living with a constant state of fear of going to sleep, because I thought that would be the night that I would have some type of an attack that would just freak me out. And I dealt with that for many, many years. And it was years after that I was able to experience some true deliverance. So just as a sidebar, if that's something that you struggle with, God is the same yesterday, today, and forevermore, and he can heal you and he can deliver you, and he desires you to, and you should never be someone that is a victim of that when there's a Jesus who died on the cross that delivers us from that. So I would say that the fear of the Lord is not a demonic fear. It's not something that you don't want to ever even kind of like that you have to be fearful of in the middle of the night or anything like that, whatever time of day it is. But it's not a demonic fear. And finally, the fear of God is not a religious fear. When I was at Penn State, I would go, like, there would be, like, the football games had like 100,000 people there, and because like sometimes there'd be like coverage there and stuff like that, that would be where this group of people would always, they called themselves Christians, but they would come into campus. Then they kind of circle around the parking lot, and they still hold up signs that says God hates gay people, or you're going to burn in hell, like all these things that were completely contrary to the way Jesus intended for the gospel to be shared. But they were using this religious fear to win people back to Christ, or to Christ. You know what I mean? So it's kind of crazy how much influence they had there. But when Jesus is saying, when God's saying the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, he's not talking about a religious fear either. All that is like in whatever, we'll talk about that later. But what he is saying, what the fear of the Lord is, the fear of the Lord is a desire to please him. It's letting our decisions never be more important than the will of God. See, that's the thing. When we think that we have a plan set up for our own lives, essentially when we think like, oh, you know what, this is my major, this is the exact job I'm going to get, this is how much money I'm going to make, and this is where I'm going to invest it, and that's going to be my life for the rest of forever. Like that plan that we have just set up, if it's contrary to the will of God, we are not fearing God, because we are not respecting the desire that we should have to please him. Because what we have decided to do in that moment seems more important than the will of God. God needs to be the gate for every single plan, every single decision that we could ever make in our lives. So the first thing that the fear of the Lord is the desire to please him. And secondly, it's a reverence. It's having a reverence for God. This is one of the most important things. See, when I was driving down a highway, all of you guys probably do this, but what's the first thing that you do? You're driving down the highway, it says like 50 miles per hour, but you're going to 70, and then you see a cop. First thing that you do is you slam the brakes, you throw your seatbelt on, you throw 10 and 2, both hands on the wheel, and right, like there you go. Like it's something that everyone does that. What really happened there though? Did you all of a sudden feel like, you know what? I should get my life together. Like in a split second, I'm gonna stop going 70. I'm gonna go 50. No, that's not exactly. I'm just reading the comments right now. What really happened is you had a respect or a fear of the authority figure that was setting the rules on the road. That's what it is. So in the same way, the reverence that you had for that cop caused you to get in line and start doing what you needed to do on that road. In the same exact way, a fear of God is basically having a reverence for the authority that God has on this road that we call life. So essentially what we're saying is that all we have to do in order to fear God is we need to respect the guidelines that he has placed in Scripture for us to move forward in a way that honors him. And the greatest way that James kind of goes back into making that a main point is by straight up saying, yo, control your tongue. Control your tongue, because that's one of the ways where you kind of deviate and start losing the reverence that you have for God, because that tongue is like a fire. Like that thing can burn down a forest. It's one of the most detrimental ways that you can reverse everything that God is trying to do in your life to create you into a pillar of society and to be someone that can bring salvation to an entire family, your entire campus, make revival spark out. Your tongue can stop that, or it can support it. And that's what James is saying over here. The next thing or the final thing that would be described as the fear of the Lord is having an attitude of submission to him. Just like Luke chapter 22, verse 42 says, Lord, not my will, but yours. When you are completely convinced that the best thing that you can do in your life is submit yourself and do what God has called you to do, you are living in a godly wisdom. Now, on the contrary, if we go back to James chapter 5, I already lost my place, but James chapter 5, you guys got my nose sweaty. My goodness, man, I'm preaching in here. But if you go back to James chapter 3, James talks about, we basically talked about a godly wisdom, which is very pure. It's very peaceable. But he goes on and talks about what is it that ungodly or earthly wisdom looks like. In James chapter 3, verse 14, it says, if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth. That wisdom is not the wisdom that comes from above, but it is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For wherever jealousy and selfish ambition exists, there will be disorder and every vile practice. So basically, ungodly wisdom is described as jealousy and selfish ambition. Basically, the best way to put that is our nature. When we're jealous, we desire something that someone else has. We desire ourselves to be in a position of an influence that someone or something else has. When we have a selfish ambition, we are willing to do anything at any cost to make sure that we're the recipient of the benefit of that thing. So basically, when we're trying to operate in ungodly wisdom, other people need to get hurt in order for our advancement to take place, right? But godly wisdom is the type that puts ourselves last and brings other people forward. It makes our attention and it kind of makes our intentionality be focused outwards and on other people. And so I'll tell you, one of the greatest things that I've ever learned in life is when you make yourself seem outward focused, when you make yourself dependent or someone that God can depend on to bring blessing, truth, and support to other people. Naturally, I don't know how, but naturally people begin to look at you as someone that is of influence, someone that God can depend on, and someone that can be trusted. And opportunities come in your direction that completely shape the rest of your life that other people are not going to have because they're so busy trying to produce that ungodly wisdom, thinking that it's something that can benefit them in the future. Am I right? So that's one of the greatest things that James talks about here. I know my time is about up, so I'm going to wrap up. But the one thing that I will say is that in order for us to operate in a godly wisdom, fear God. Fear God. And the only thing, or one of the greatest things that can completely stand in opposition to us operating and living in a godly wisdom is the tongue that we possess. Because when we are not using it in a way that is completely submitted to the will of God, it can crush us. It can crush the people around you. It can do some crazy damage that can ruin the potential that God has for you. And I'm not saying that there's never going to be any restoration, that God can't pick up the pieces, but it's something that becomes that much more harder, and it's unnecessary. So I would say to all of you guys that in everything that you say, in everything that you do, every single step that you take, stop and ask God, how do I respond to this? You know what? I'm not even going to, I can't end without mentioning one of the main ways that James says how we get wisdom. And he literally says in James chapter 1, and whoever spoke on James chapter 1, I don't mean to cramp your style and kind of go back on your topic, but James chapter 1, verses 5, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him. Ask God. If you're saying, you know what, my tongue, I'm not really stewarding it well. I've caused a lot of hurt to other people unintentionally. I've said things that I don't mean. During this quarantine, I kind of offended the people that I live with. I wasn't operating in a godly wisdom, but rather an earthly wisdom. God, I ask that you give me wisdom in abundance so that I would be able to glorify you and add value to the people around me the way that you intend me to do so. And the word says, James says, listen, I was his brother, I will tell you for sure that when you ask him, he will give you abundantly. He will give the wisdom. He will pour it abundantly. It's the only way that you can get wisdom is when you sit and ask God. So I would encourage all of you guys that even when you're alone, what they used to call James, the man with calloused knees. And the reason why is because he spent so much time in prayer. And the same intensity, I would say all of us spend time in prayer, just be in the presence of God and earnestly asking for that wisdom to be able to kind of move and live in a wisdom that is intentional and submissive to the will of God. And I know that we have a couple questions that we wanted to discuss in our breakout session, so I don't want to take too much time up, but I thank you guys for allowing me to share this brief thought. May God bless you all. Keep me in prayer. I'm keeping all of you in prayer. And if there's anything that any of us can do to help, I'd love to be there as a resource for you all. So God bless you guys, and thank you so much for these few moments to share what God put in my heart.